a major American university tracked over 96,000 people for more than a decade. It's one of the largest, most detailed studies of its kind ever conducted. The people in this study were not monks living in a remote monastery. They were modern Americans, living in cities, driving cars, breathing the same air, subject to the same stresses as the rest of us. Yet their outcomes were different. They had significantly lower rates of many cancers, dramatically lower rates of heart disease, lower rates of diabetes, less obesity. On average, they lived up to a decade longer than the typical American. A pocket of longevity, a confirmed blue zone, hiding in plain sight in Loma Linda, California. This community, the Seventh-day Adventists, achieved these results by following a set of health principles formally adopted in the 1860s. But when you trace those principles to their roots, you discover they are not new. They are an echo of a far older, far more comprehensive health code, a code written down more than 3,000 years ago in the third book of the Bible. The book of Leviticus, dismissed by many as a list of strange rituals and arcane laws. What if Leviticus is actually one of the most sophisticated public health manuals ever written? A document that contains a blueprint for controlling the single greatest driver of chronic disease in the modern world, inflammation. The title of this video asks a question. What if the real cure for inflammation wasn't in a pharmacy, but in Leviticus? By the end of this video, you won't just understand the answer. You will understand the mechanisms. Stick around, because one of these ancient principles concerning a specific type of animal fat is something modern nutritional science is only now admitting is crucial for controlling inflammation at a cellular level. And what this community avoids eating, a category of animals explicitly forbidden in Leviticus, turns out to create a silent inflammatory fire that even health-conscious people are overlooking. In the land of the sick, what do the healthy avoid? Before we look at what the people of Leviticus and Loma Linda do, we have to start with what they don't do. The modern Western diet is a masterclass in generating inflammation. Processed vegetable oils, refined sugar, and chemical additives create a constant, low-grade state of emergency in the body. The immune system never stands down. This is the background hum of modern life. The Levitical Code offered a way out, and one of its primary instructions was a clear distinction between what it called clean and unclean animals. For centuries, this was viewed as arbitrary religious taboo. But what if it was a brilliant, pre-scientific system for minimizing inflammatory load? Consider two of the most popular foods in the world, both strictly forbidden by Leviticus and avoided by many Adventists: pork and shellfish. Pork is exceptionally high in a specific omega-6 fatty acid called arachidonic acid. Your body uses this fatty acid to create signaling molecules called eicosanoids. And when you have an excess of arachidonic acid, the signals it sends are overwhelmingly pro-inflammatory. In contrast, animals that chew the cud and have a divided hoof, the Levitical definition of clean, tend to have a more favorable fatty acid profile, with higher levels of anti-inflammatory omega-3s, especially if they are grass-fed. The law wasn't about divine preference. It was a guide to biochemistry. Shellfish present a different kind of inflammatory risk. As filter feeders or bottom dwellers, they concentrate whatever is in their environment. In the ancient world, this meant bacteria and parasites. In the modern world, it means heavy metals and microplastics. They are also high in purines, which the body breaks down into uric acid. For susceptible people, this directly causes gout, a disease of pure, painful inflammation. Avoiding these two categories wasn't a punishment. It was a protection. It was a public health directive, designed to steer an entire population away from foods that carried a higher inflammatory risk. They didn't have the vocabulary of fatty acids and purines. They just had the observation of outcomes. Eat this, you stay well. Eat that, you get sick. The people of Loma Linda have rediscovered this principle. By focusing on a primarily plant-based diet, and for those who do eat meat, following guidelines that echo the Levitical Code, they have systematically dismantled the most inflammatory parts of the standard American diet. Avoiding the bad is only half the system. The true genius of the Levitical Code is in its positive commands. These are the mechanisms that build resilience and proactively turn down the dial on inflammation. And when you look at them through the lens of modern science, they are stunningly precise. First, there is the law of the fat. Leviticus chapter 7 is very clear. It instructs the Israelites, "You shall not eat any of the fat of cattle, sheep, or goats." At first glance, this sounds like the failed low-fat advice of the 1980s, but the original Hebrew uses a specific word, chelev. This is not just any fat. It refers to the hard, waxy, visceral fat that surrounds the organs, the suet. The law forbids eating the chelev, but it does not forbid eating the animal itself, which contains a different kind of fat, the marbling integrated into the muscle. The Biblical Code was making a sophisticated distinction between two different types of fat from the same animal. And modern science has proven this distinction is a matter of life and death. That hard, visceral chelev fat is profoundly different from subcutaneous or intramuscular fat. It is metabolically active in the worst way possible. It secretes inflammatory cytokines, drives insulin resistance, and is directly linked to metabolic syndrome, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes. The Bible, 3,000 years before we had mass spectrometry, was telling people to avoid the exact fat tissue that science now knows is an engine of inflammation. This wasn't a dietary preference, it was a surgical intervention. The second mechanism is the law of rest. The modern world worships exhaustion as a status symbol. We are chronically overstimulated and under-rested, and the price we pay is measured in cortisol. Chronic stress keeps your cortisol levels permanently elevated. At first, cortisol is anti-inflammatory, but when the system is exposed to it constantly, your cells become resistant to its effects. This leads to a state where inflammation can run completely unchecked. We are literally stressing ourselves into a state of disease. The Levitical Code offered a radical, non-negotiable cure: the Sabbath. Leviticus 23 calls it a day of sacred rest, 1 day in 7. No work, no commerce, no striving. This was not a suggestion. It was a command as foundational as any other. It was a mandated reset for the entire nervous system, a forced dip in cortisol, an anti-inflammatory protocol for an entire society. The Adventists of Loma Linda hold this to be a core practice. Their week has a rhythm, a cycle of work and complete rest. This isn't laziness. It is a biological necessity that the modern world has forgotten, and it is one of the pillars supporting their extraordinary health and longevity. The third mechanism is the purity of the source. Beyond just what to eat, the Levitical Code is obsessed with the state of the food. An animal that dies of itself is strictly forbidden. This is ancient food safety. An animal that died of disease is a vector for pathogens and endotoxins, which trigger a massive, violent inflammatory response. This principle extends far beyond just meat. It's a philosophy of choosing the living over the dead. A fresh apple, vibrant with enzymes and life, versus a shelf-stable, fruit-flavored snack engineered to never decay. Processed foods, by their very nature, are dead. Their nutrients have been stripped, their fibers removed, their fats altered, and then a slurry of chemical preservatives are added to mimic the stability of non-food. Consuming them places a burden on the body. The immune system has to ask, "What is this?" That question, asked over and over, is the start of inflammation. The people of Loma Linda live this principle by prioritizing whole foods. Their diet is rich in fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, and whole grains. They eat food as close to its original state as possible. They are observing one of the deepest laws in Leviticus, that purity of the source is a prerequisite for health. The Personal Replication Guide. You don't need to live in California, and you don't need to go back 3,000 years. The principles are timeless, and you can begin applying them today. This is where we resolve what I promised you at the start. The secret was there in the open. The cure for inflammation wasn't a magic herb or a lost elixir. It was a system of patterns. The law of the fat the chelev, was a masterclass in biochemistry, teaching us to distinguish between dangerous, pro-inflammatory visceral fats and healthier fats. This is why a steak from a grass-fed animal is not the same as a hot dog. It is why olive oil is not the same as cottonseed oil. Quality and source are everything. The law of avoidance, starting with pork and shellfish, was a clear guide to reducing our load of pro-inflammatory compounds and environmental toxins, a simple way to clear the noise so the body can heal. The law of rest forces us to confront the fact that our mental state and our inflammatory state are the same thing. You cannot heal a body that is in a constant state of emergency. And the law of purity teaches that health is found in things that are alive. So how do you apply this? You don't have to adopt an ancient religion. You just have to recognize the wisdom. Start by distinguishing your fats. Prioritize those from whole plants, avocados, nuts, olives. If you eat meat, choose leaner cuts from the best source you can find. Mandate rest. Carve out one 24-hour period each week. Turn off the news, the email, the noise. Walk in nature. Be with your family. Let your cortisol levels fall. This is medicine. And finally, prioritize the pure. Look at the food in your hands and ask a simple question from Leviticus. Is this living or is it dead? Here is your single action. The first step, tonight or tomorrow, go into your kitchen. Find the single most processed food item you own. The one with the longest ingredient list, filled with words you can't pronounce. It might be a box of cereal, a can of soup, or a packet of dressing. Now throw it in the trash. Don't just hide it in the back of the pantry. Remove it. By doing this, you are not just decluttering. You are making a declaration. You are observing one of the oldest principles of health in human history. You are choosing the clean over the unclean, the living over the dead, and you are taking the first step away from the pharmacy and toward a source of wisdom that has been waiting for you all along.